Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers. This is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com. And did you know that it is quite possible that oxygen is the most important nutrient that you can take in to your body to help combat all forms of disease? If we look at cancer, for instance, it's well known that cancer does not thrive whatsoever in an oxygen-rich environment. That is probably the number one reason why aerobic exercise is considered good for your health. Is not so much the cardiovascular benefits, but actually the consistent deep breathing that occurs when you're doing an endurance exercise and you're oxygenating all your cells to a greater degree than perhaps other forms of exercise. Now if we look at a stroke, which is another big killer, you could say, or big harmer of health, that damages people's health as they progress in age and tends to devalue the later years of their life. But a stroke occurs from a blockage in an artery leading to the brain, and because a certain portion of the brain is not getting oxygen, or perhaps the entire brain for a short period of time, brain damage occurs. And brain damage is lack of oxygen, and there's a process that goes on where the brain is no longer functioning and is considered to become permanently damaged. Now, it is actually a well-known fact among the medical community, but it's not really put into practice, that if you get someone into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber within an hour, optimally within a half hour after they start having signs of a stroke, you can actually reverse all the symptoms. And this is because the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which is something you get into whether it's like an oxygen tent, or hyperbaric oxygen chamber is actually more than an oxygen tent. It's completely sealed and it's pumped full of oxygen, so you're basically getting flooded with a much higher degree of oxygen in the air you're breathing rather than the 25% or so that's in some air. It's even less in cities. It's definitely below 20% in polluted cities, the oxygen content of the air. But because there's a saturation of oxygen into the bloodstream in a hyperbaric chamber, it's quite possible to reverse the symptoms of a stroke if that person's gotten into a hyperbaric chamber in that narrow window before the serious brain damage has occurred, which is from the continued lack of oxygen to that one part of the brain. Now, it's really unfortunate that there isn't a hyperbaric chamber on every block in every city in the world, or at least in the developed world, because that really should be a top priority for preventing this, and it's basically well known that this works. And the other situation is deep sea divers, after they come up from diving underwater, and if they happen to have gotten nitrogen bubbles in their bloodstream, which results from going too deep, and the nitrogen in their blood literally turns to bubbles in their bloodstream, and that can cause the same thing as a stroke. It blocks the blood flow to the brain. I actually met someone that had this happen to them, and they did get into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber in time. Within half an hour they were airlifted to a hospital in that area. I believe it was somewhere in the tropics, but that diving group that they were with knew that this is something that had to be done to prevent the damage or the possible fatal effects of nitrogen bubbles in the blood. And that's called the bends, when you get the nitrogen bubbles. And so what I'm getting at with this is just highlighting the importance of oxygen, and how just not enough of it for a very short period of time to various parts of your body, or for an extended period of time, low levels of it in the cases of cancer, can cause damage and cause the proliferation of disease. Even things like candida overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, and all these other sort of things where there's items and fungus and bacteria sort of taking over the body in some form, if it's an infection, etc. That is in part possible to occur because of a lack of oxygen to that area of the body. So how can we get more oxygen into our body? Well, raw food is the most oxygen-rich food that we can consume. And yes, we can absorb oxygen from food, as odd as it may sound. If you simply think about how the lungs work in terms of absorbing oxygen from the air, we breathe in air, which is approximately 1/4 oxygen, and we absorb just simply through diffusion of the oxygen molecules going across a single cell membrane in the alveoli, which are the components in the lungs where the capillaries run blood through, and then that lets oxygen attach to the hemoglobin just on the other side of this one cell thick wall. And so the oxygen goes into the bloodstream and then is carried off. So there's nothing really that special in the lungs, except that it has a very large surface area because it has all these hair-like alveoli inside. Now in the digestive tract, it works exactly the same way when we absorb nutrients from food. The food becomes a liquid and it passes across the walls of the digestive tract. Our bloodstream pulls in the nutrients that it requires and that it is able to take up. Now oxygen in the food can just be absorbed just as easily. Now oxygen in food is condensed into the blood of plants, into the molecules of the plants, and also in water. So we can actually get a certain amount of oxygen from water, but really food is the best thing we can focus on, and specifically green leafy vegetables, sprouts, and algae, such as sprouts like sunflower sprouts, pea shoots, and even E3 Live, and I'll have a link below if you want to check that out. It's a fresh frozen algae, and these are all very oxygen rich, very health promoting foods. And then to a lesser degree, fruits would also contain oxygen, and then at the bottom of the plant foods you're going to have nuts and seeds. If they're germinated, they're going to have a certain amount of oxygen content in them, but it's quite minimal when compared to the very oxygenating green plant foods, green leafy vegetables, sprouts, wheatgrass, etc. And that's what makes the greens so key to fighting serious diseases, and that's really how the Hippocrates Institute has been so successful in their treatment of a vast array of diseases. So when you're oxygenated, you feel lighter, you feel more energized, and that's definitely a benefit of raw food. And also just incorporating deep breathing, obviously, and exercise that's going to increase your rate of breathing is important. Getting rid of the things that plug up the lungs in terms of like smoking, that's an obvious one. It's going to reduce your absorption of oxygen to the body. And living in areas where there's a lot of dust and other junk in the air floating around, that's going to be just extra work for your body to clear out of the lungs. Now interestingly, there's two great herbs for increasing your blood oxygenation, or the ability for your blood to increase the amount of oxygen it can take up from the air through the lungs. And that is, number one is Cordyceps. It's well renowned for use by athletes, especially endurance athletes, used by Chinese Olympic teams in their endurance events and their endurance athletes. And then also Reishi Mushroom. And I've put a link below to two articles I've written, one on Reishi Mushroom, one on Cordyceps, if you hadn't seen those before. I highly recommend checking those out, just to read about all the other benefits about these two amazing adaptogenic medicinal mushrooms. They're two of my favorite tonic herbs to take on an almost daily basis. And I've also got a link below to Hyperion herbs, which is a great source for both of these herbs in the form of extracts, which you can simply add to smoothies or elixirs, add into food, add into salad dressings, and just take them in and feel the benefits that you get on your bloodstream, on your oxygenation. And they go great with raw food and just the whole idea of bringing more oxygen, life, or chi into your being. And when that is abundant, you have energy, you have the will to get things accomplished in your day-to-day life, and also just to simply be alive and be vibrant. And that is really what we're all searching for. That's what most people look into the health food movement for, is to simply get ways of feeling better. And that lack of a feeling good is, generally speaking, an inability to hold a large amount of chi, or energy, or life force, which is translated by how much oxygen you can uptake into your body and oxygenate and purify your blood cells. So remember, take care, bring green friends into your life, whether they're houseplants and or foods you take into your body, and embrace life without limits.